It was for them.
Your father and I have found work opportunities abroad. It's a fresh start for us, and we think it'll be better for you to stay with your grandmother. She can take care of you and your disease.
It's for the best, Kate. We'll send money and we'll visit, but you need to understand that we can't take you with us.
I remember sitting there, confused. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to stay. I just sat there numbly as they packed my things and drove me to my grandmother's house. She lived in a small, run-down cottage at the edge of town. When we arrived, my grandmother welcomed me with open arms. She was old and frail, but her embrace was the first warmth I'd felt in months. My parents didn't even stay for dinner. They left as quickly as they had come, leaving me behind with nothing but a small suitcase and the bitter taste of rejection. My grandmother did her best to take care of me. Hello, my name is Kate, and this is a story of how my parents abandoned me for having psoriasis. I was 8 years old when it started. It was a day during summer when I woke up to find my arms covered in dry, scaly patches. They were red and itchy, so inflamed that it hurt to touch. At first, I thought it was just a rash, maybe from playing outside or rolling around in the grass like I usually did. My first instinct was to show it to my mom, hoping she would know what to do. But when she saw it, her face showed pure disgust and horror.
What is that? What is this?
I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, my arms hanging limply at my sides, hoping that she would help me. Instead, she took a step back, as if she couldn't bear to be near me. She screamed for my dad, and he hurried to us. He also had a look of disgust, but it wasn't up to my mom's.
Maybe she's allergic to something.
His voice wasn't concerned. Instead, he sounded annoyed, like I had inconvenienced him by having something wrong with me. Over the next few weeks, my parents took me to several doctors. Each time, they seemed more exhausted with the process, as if they expected a quick fix that would make their problem disappear. When the diagnosis came back, it turned out to be psoriasis. They acted like it was my fault. The doctor explained that it was a chronic condition and that there was no cure, only treatments to manage it. But all my parents heard was that their daughter was flawed.
I don't understand how this could have happened. We don't have anything like this in our family.
It's bad enough that it's incurable. Now everyone's going to think there's something wrong with us.
But there was something wrong, though it had nothing to do with me. My parents had caused this. When my mom was pregnant with me, she had taken medication for something minor, a simple cold, I think. But she hadn't checked if it was safe. The medication had triggered the psoriasis in my genes, according to what the doctor told us. It wasn't my fault, but they never admitted their role in it. Instead, they took their guilt and turned it into resentment toward me. As the patches spread across my arms, legs, and even my face, my parents' coldness intensified. They stopped touching me altogether. No more goodnight kisses, no more hugs. In their eyes, I had become a walking reminder of their mistake. The love they once had for me was replaced by contempt. They began to call me names like freak, diseased, burden. At the time, I was too young to fully understand what was happening. All I knew was that my parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, couldn't stand the sight of me anymore. Every time my mom looked at me, it was disgust and anger, and my dad would avoid eye contact altogether. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I had gone to get a glass of water, but their voices stopped me in my tracks.
Can't keep her. She's ruining everything. People are starting to talk.
We'll figure something out. Maybe we could send her to my mother's. She's always been good with kids.
My heart shattered. Send me away? I hadn't even realized that was an option. I thought maybe they were just angry, that things would go back to normal eventually. But they didn't. But one morning, they sat me down and told me we were going on a trip. But it wasn't for me. It was for them.
Your father and I have found work opportunities abroad. It's a fresh start for us, and we think it'll be better for you to stay with your grandmother. She can take care of you and your disease.
It's for the best, Kate. We'll send money and we'll visit, but you need to understand that we can't take you with us.
I remember sitting there, confused. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to stay. I just sat there numbly as they packed my things and drove me to my grandmother's house. She lived in a small, run-down cottage at the edge of town. When we arrived, my grandmother welcomed me with open arms. She was old and frail, but her embrace was the first warmth I'd felt in months. My parents didn't even stay for dinner. They left as quickly as they had come, leaving me behind with nothing but a small suitcase and the bitter taste of rejection. My grandmother did her best to take care of me, but it wasn't easy. She was already struggling with her own health issues, and now she had a sick, abandoned granddaughter to worry about. We didn't have much money, and the treatments for my psoriasis were expensive. Sometimes we couldn't afford the medication at all, and I had to suffer through the flare-ups with nothing but home remedies and my grandmother's soothing words. School was no better. The other kids were cruel. They called me names like Scaly Kate and Disease Girl, and no one wanted to sit next to me in class. I was an outcast, marked by the red patches on my skin and the whispers that followed me wherever I went. There were days when I wanted to disappear, when I wished I could scrub my skin raw just to get rid of the disease that made me different. But no matter how hard I scrubbed, it was always there. As the years went by, my parents rarely called. When they did, it was brief and distant, as if I were just a chore they had to check off their list. They promised to send money, but they hardly ever did. My grandmother and I struggled, but she never complained. She worked tirelessly. She was the only one who cared, the only one who stayed. Then, when I was 16, I heard the news that shattered what little hope I had left. A family friend who had just returned from Europe told us that my parents had another child. A perfect daughter who didn't have psoriasis. They had built a new life for themselves, one without me. They had moved on, replaced me, and were living in a big house with everything they could ever want. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had erased me from their lives. I had always hoped deep down that they would come back for me, that they would realize their mistake and want me again. But they didn't. That's when I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for people to save me. My parents weren't coming back, and no one was going to fix my life for me. If I wanted a future, I had to make it myself. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I didn't know I had. I worked harder than ever, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore, I was fighting for something better. And it paid off. Despite everything, I excelled in school. My grades were top of the class, and my teachers took notice. With their help, I applied for scholarships, hoping to get into college. When the acceptance letter came, along with a full scholarship to study medicine, it felt like a miracle. I was going to be a doctor. I threw myself into my studies again after getting into college, learning everything I could about dermatology and autoimmune diseases. And, by some stroke of luck, I found a treatment that worked for my psoriasis. The patches began to fade, and for the first time in years, I felt free. After graduation, I opened my own practice through the help of my boyfriend and some sponsors in my college who'd taken note of my hard work. I specialized mainly in skin disorders, but I didn't stop there. I started an NGO for children with psoriasis, offering free treatment and support to families who couldn't afford it. My boyfriend's father was so impressed that he helped me take things even further, and I finally had my own hospital and employed specialists in different fields. Years passed, and life was good. My grandmother and I were happy. We had built a life filled with love together. I was finally at peace with myself. Then one day, everything turned again. I was in my office at the hospital, going through patient files when I saw a familiar name. My parents. I froze. I hadn't seen them in years, hadn't heard from them since the time they had their daughter. I blinked, thinking it had to be a mistake, but there it was, clear as day. They were there, in my hospital, looking for help. But it wasn't for them. It was for their other daughter, the one they had chosen over me. Her name was Grace. I learned from her file that she had been diagnosed with stomach cancer, an aggressive form. They had taken her to several hospitals, trying to find someone who could help her, but no one had been able to do anything. I was probably one of the best in my state, so they had recommended me to them. She was running out of time. I was confused. Part of me didn't want to see them, didn't want to face the people who had discarded me like I was nothing. But another part of me wanted them to see me, to show what I had become without them. So I made my decision. I put on my white coat and walked down the hall to the room where they were waiting. When I stepped into the room, it was like stepping back in time. My parents were sitting there, looking older but still unmistakably themselves.
Kate, is it really you?
Kate, thank God you're here. You can help her, right? You're a doctor now. You have to help your sister.
As usual, entitled people. My sister? I didn't even know the girl. She was a stranger to me, the child they had replaced me with. I'm sorry, but I can't help you.
What do you mean you can't help? You're her sister. You're a doctor. You have to save her.
We're family, Kate. You can't turn your back on us now.
You stopped being my family the day you abandoned me. You left me with Grandma and went off to live your perfect life, pretending like I didn't exist. And now you expect me to save your daughter because we're family? No, that's not how this works. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't help her. You'll need to find another doctor.
Kate, please, she's dying.
My mom was crying, the same tears she refused to shed for me. She's your daughter, your responsibility, just like I was once. But you chose to walk away from me. Now I'm choosing to walk away from you. They cried, they begged, but nothing they said could change what had happened. I had spent my whole life without them, and I wasn't going to let them back in just because they needed me now. In the months that followed, I heard from a family friend that Grace had passed away. My parents had lost their perfect daughter, and now they were left with nothing. They tried to contact me again after Grace's death, asking for forgiveness, but I couldn't give it. My grandmother and I lived our lives peacefully after that. We had each other, and that was enough. I took care of her, just as she had taken care of me all those years ago. We didn't need my parents. We never had. As for my parents, they lived out the rest of their lives alone and bitter. The irony? Both of them developed severe psoriasis in their later years, and people started avoiding them as well, calling them degrading names like old monsters. They were both depressed and lonely. The disease they had hated me for, the condition that had caused them to abandon me, became their own curse. Karma, I suppose. Thanks for watching.
Baby, you don't have to take sides. You don't have to defend her. People like her are liabilities, I know that. Come on, don't pretend. She stresses you a lot, right?
Can you stop this? You're embarrassing me in front of my sister, Johnson. She's not a burden to me, okay?
But you know she is. We've been together for a year, love. I know when you're lying, and right now you are. Tell me, do you help her clean her butt when she uses the toilet?
Hi. My name's Lily, and I'm 24 years old. I live with my elder sister, Lana, who's 27. We've been living together since I was 19. Lana works as a developer at 3 different gaming companies, while I work as a remote marketer. I finished college early, when I was 21, and got a job 2 years after. On the day I graduated from college, I got into an accident that nearly claimed my life. I was unable to walk after. Lana's fiance, Johnson, didn't like me. He and Lana had met about a year ago. He was a business partner of one of the gaming companies she worked in. My sister hates disappointing people, so she refused to introduce him to us until he proposed. Since she was big on marriage, she tried to avoid introducing any unsure relationship to us. So, when she told me Johnson proposed and she'd introduced him to our parents, my joy knew no bounds. I was so excited and eager to meet the man who'd captured my sister's heart and trust. Sadly, our meeting didn't turn out to be as I imagined. When Johnson and Lana walked in, I excitedly wheeled myself toward them and extended my hand for a shake. Hi, Johnson. I'm so excited to finally meet you.
What? A cripple? I can't believe this. She must be a liability to you, baby. Why don't you just let her be with your parents?
Excuse me? She's my sister, Johnson. I love being around her, and she's not a liability.
Well, yeah. Shockingly, the first time I met Johnson, after expressing so much happiness, that was his reaction. I felt a pang of sadness in my chest. I knew I wasn't a liability to Lana. She often offered to help me with certain things, but I always refused. I didn't ever want to be a burden to her, so I learned to do everything on my own. I took care of myself well, despite my predicament, and Lana always told me how proud she was of me. So, hearing him call me a liability made me feel sad and pissed.
Baby, you don't have to take sides. You don't have to defend her. People like her are liabilities, I know that. Come on, don't pretend. She stresses you a lot, right?
Can you stop this? You're embarrassing me in front of my sister, Johnson. She's not a burden to me, okay?
But you know she is. We've been together for a year, love. I know when you're lying, and right now you are. Tell me, do you help her clean her butt when she uses the toilet?
Excuse me? There. I lost my cool. What? How could he say such a thing? I respect you a lot, but I won't stand and watch you say such things about me.
You can't even stand, young lady.
Johnson!
That was the truth. Can she stand? She ought to use words she can make happen. She could have easily said, sit.
My lips trembled as I got teary. He was being so disrespectful to me. I couldn't believe that I was so happy to meet such a horrible person.
Get out of my house, Johnson! Get out, you piece of shit!
Lana pushed him out and rushed back to comfort me. She promised to end things with him, but I refused to be the cause of that. To introduce him to our parents, I knew Lana loved him. I couldn't bring myself to be the reason for their separation. You won't do that, Lana. I can't let it happen. I'll avoid him until he accepts me, okay? She was sad, but she finally accepted and apologized to me. I believed and hoped that Johnson would apologize to me too. I deserved that. Unfortunately, he never did. I didn't bother anymore. After about a month, they began making plans for their wedding. My sister got a promotion and felt it was the right time to get married. One day, I was home with Scott, her best friend, when Lana and Johnson walked in. He greeted Scott, but when I greeted him, he ignored me. Johnson, I said hi to you.
I refused to reply. I don't wish to speak to you. Can you let me be? Gosh, come on, man, don't be like that. She's your sister-in-law. You should be respectful to her.
It's fine, Scott. I'll just go to my room. Lana tried to stop me, but I gave her a reassuring smile before wheeling myself away. In my room, I heard their yelling, and I knew they were fighting because of me again. I felt so sad. After that day, I made sure to avoid Johnson. I moved my things to my room and worked from there so that they won't walk in while I'm in the living room. Lana didn't like that and felt bad, but I assured her that I was fine. Well, their wedding day drew closer and we began hastening the plans. One day, Scott, Lana, and I were in the living room picking out me and Scott's dress when Johnson walked in. I was startled and made to go to my room when Lana stopped me. Thankfully, Johnson ignored me. Well, I did the same. He went to sit beside Lana and took the design book.
What are you doing?
We're picking out dresses for Scott and Lily. Lily's gonna be my chief bridesmaid.
I watched as Johnson's face contorted into a frown. He stood up angrily and I knew he was going to go livid.
She's coming to our wedding? I can't believe you, Lana. How can you let this disabled thing come to our wedding? She's gonna embarrass us in front of my business partners.
Don't say that, Johnson. This is my sister. Can you hear yourself? She has to be at my wedding. It's a must, okay?
I felt bad seeing them arguing again. At the same time, I also felt angry. Why would he not want me at my sister's wedding? I could tolerate him hating me, but not this. Scott stepped in and tried to make Johnson understand that I had to be in attendance, but Johnson refused to listen. He kept yelling, and at one point, he nearly slapped me. Scott had to step in and kick him out of the house. My sister burst into tears, and I did too. I felt so bad because I was the cause of it. I tried to tell her to take me out of the wedding attendee list, but Lana wasn't having any of it.
You're my sister, Lily. I will never pick a man over you. I will call off this wedding if Johnson refuses to let you be my bridesmaid.
Before I could speak, she stormed out of the house. I started crying again. Thankfully, Scott was there to support me. Lana reported the issue to the whole family after Johnson kept refusing. A family meeting was held, but I refused to attend. I didn't want more trouble than I'd already caused. Scott was there. He'd already become like family to us. I also knew he cared a lot about Lana. He liked her, but couldn't tell her because he was afraid of losing their friendship. He came home first after the meeting to tell me that Lana had called off the wedding.
Johnson kept saying offensive things about you. Your parents and his parents warned him, but he didn't stop. Lana got angry and called off the wedding.
I felt even worse. My sister wouldn't be getting married because of me. I needed to be left alone, so I asked Scott to leave. He tried to protest, but I yelled at him and he eventually left. I locked the door and went to my room to cry my eyes out. About 30 minutes later, I heard the front door open. I thought it was Lana, so I left my room so I could apologize. You can imagine my shock when I saw Johnson. He looked drunk and angry. Before I could speak, he pounced on me and began hitting me. He slapped, punched, and even strangled me. He was so angry. According to him, I had ruined his marriage plans with Lana. I began to scream for help when he started taking my clothes off. I knew what was going to happen. Just after my last button was off, Scott and Lana walked in. Apparently, Scott was scared that I'd hurt myself, so he'd gone to get Lana. Seeing me in that situation, they quickly stepped in and pulled him away. Angrily, Scott began punching him. He didn't stop until Johnson fell and fainted, his nose and lips broken. The cops were quickly called and they arrested the unconscious man. There, they discovered that on his way to our house, he hit someone with his car and ran away. He panicked and went somewhere and started drinking before coming to where I was. If others didn't find the woman, she would have died there. News spread quickly. Johnson was a famous man as well as his gaming company. Immediately people heard the news, they began hating him. They stormed his house, destroying and also stealing things. His car's windows were broken, the tires bursted. People also boycotted his games. In barely 2 weeks, his workers resigned. His company was abandoned. He was canceled. Well, Johnson was kept in the custody of the cops. Lana and I delayed his trial so he would witness his downfall before going to jail. And yes, he was miserable. His eyes were dead, and he had huge eye bags, as well as dark under eyes. His hair and beard overgrew. He looked tattered. We eventually charged him to court where he was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment for attempted murder, attempted rape, and physical assault. After that, Lana broke down. She loved Johnson, so I could understand her pain. I had to move into my parents' house to give her space. Scott was with her. He was the only one she allowed in her space. He took care of her and hardly ever left her side. After 1 year, Lana was finally over him. She refused to date anyone else. I moved back in with her and she apologized for shutting me out. I understood and also apologized for being the main cause of her issue with Johnson.
Don't ever blame yourself. He's a bad and evil man. He would do the same to someone else.
I also got to know that he had anger issues and even hit Lana twice. I stopped blaming myself and accepted that he was bad. 2 years later, after I even moved out of Lana's house, she still refused to date anyone. I knew Scott was still in love with her, so I told her about it. I was surprised when she shyly told me she was aware. She also liked him, but was waiting for him to confess. Eventually, they both confessed and began dating. I was so happy because I knew she was in good hands. They only dated for 6 months before getting married. Everyone was so happy. Even Johnson's parents attended the wedding and were happy for Scott and Lana. 3 months after their wedding, I tried therapy sessions to see if I could walk. Fortunately, it worked. A year later, I was finally able to walk a few distances. It's been 6 years now. I walk properly and don't need any support. I'm married and have a kid with my husband. Lana and Scott already have 2 kids and are living happily. They both started a gaming company 2 years back, and it's one of the popular gaming companies now. As for me, I have my own marketing brand, and my husband is a well-known businessman with companies scattered around the globe. As for Johnson, he's still in jail. I visited him a year ago to spite him. He was shocked to see me walking and even more shocked to hear about how good all of us are doing. He had become even more miserable and looked way older than his age. He did beg for my forgiveness and asked me to apologize to Lana. I refused. He doesn't deserve my forgiveness, and Lana refuses to listen to anything about him. He can rot in jail alone for all we care. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. Their scams grew bolder over time. They once staged an entire fake charity in my name, claiming I had a terminal illness. They'd post online, write letters to churches, even host events to raise funds. I was forced to play along, pretending to be weak and fragile. I hated every second of it, hated the fake tears they'd demand from me when donors came to visit.
Cry more, Jennifer. Make it look real. Why are you so stiff? Behave like a child I birthed, will you?
Mom, I don't want to do this.
I'm your mother and you'll listen to me. You're not going to disgrace your dad and I. Do as we ask, or we're going to kill you ourselves. We can't keep a useless child with us.
Those words haunted me, a reminder that my own parents saw me as nothing more than a tool. My parents were experts in the art of deception, and I was their favorite tool. Growing up, I didn't realize how twisted our family was. To me, normal was watching my parents lie their way through life, scamming anyone they could. Family, friends, neighbors, even strangers. They'd act like the perfect couple, pretending to be upstanding, charitable people, only to trap unsuspecting victims and drain their wallets. They had endless tricks up their sleeves, but their favorite weapon was me.
Jennifer, go ask Mrs. Collins if she can lend us some money for your school supplies. Tell her we just need a bit until your father's next paycheck.
It didn't matter that I hated lying to people. My mother would flash a fake smile, gently pushing me toward the door. I'd have to look up at kind neighbors, relatives, even strangers, and repeat the script they'd drilled into me. I'd stand there, holding out my hand, and repeat the lie as my stomach twisted. The people in our community were generous, genuinely caring folks. They'd listen to my plight, shake their heads, then give whatever they could. They thought they were helping a little girl in need, but all they were doing was feeding my parents' greed. They never paid anyone back, never had any intention of it. I was the one who had to face those people later, when they'd realized they'd been taken advantage of. I was the one who felt their disappointed stares, the pity that slowly turned to disgust as they pieced together the truth. I learned early on that my parents didn't care about the consequences, only the rewards. When I was 15, I started pushing back. Why do we have to keep lying to everyone? Why can't we just do things honestly?
Do things honestly? You think we're gonna waste our lives working for scraps like everyone else? Don't be stupid, Jennifer. People are suckers, and we're just taking what's easy to take.
Their twisted logic was inescapable, hammered into me with every word. My mother would brush off my concerns, telling me I was lucky to be raised by people who knew how the world worked.
One day you'll thank us. We're teaching you how to survive, Jennifer. This world isn't kind, and only fools waste their time doing things the hard way.
That was their philosophy. And for years, I was forced to go along with it, enduring the shame of our life because, as a kid, what choice did I have? I couldn't leave. They'd threatened to throw me out if I didn't cooperate, but they knew I was too young and too scared to survive on my own. Their scams grew bolder over time. They once staged an entire fake charity in my name, claiming I had a terminal illness. They'd post online, write letters to churches, even host events to raise funds. I was forced to play along, pretending to be weak and fragile. I hated every second of it, hated the fake tears they'd demand from me when donors came to visit.
Cry more, Jennifer. Make it look real. Why are you so stiff? Behave like a child I birthed, will you?
Mom, I don't want to do this.
I'm your mother and you'll listen to me. You're not going to disgrace your dad and I. Do as we ask, or we're going to kill you ourselves. We can't keep a useless child with us.
Those words haunted me, a reminder that my own parents saw me as nothing more than a tool. I wasn't their daughter, I was their puppet, and every time I tried to resist, they'd pull the strings tighter. Once, at a church event where they'd spun a sob story about my illness, an elderly woman approached us after the service. She slipped a crumpled $100 bill into my hand, holding so much sympathy in her eyes.
The world is so unfair. You're so little, yet you face so much trouble. Take care, dear. I'll pray for you.
The guilt that flooded me was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to tell her that she was being tricked. But my parents stood right behind me, smiling and nodding, their eyes warning me to stay quiet. When we got home, my mother snatched the money from my hand.
Good job, Jennifer. See? It's easy when you just follow orders.
Shopping with my mother was always an ordeal. I'd be tense the whole time, hoping she wouldn't make me do something humiliating. One time we were at the market picking up a few things when she suddenly whispered to me,
Jennifer, go over to that stall and grab a few of those mangoes.
I stared at her, absolutely horrified. Mom, I can't just steal them.
You'll do as I say. If you don't, I'll make sure you don't eat for 3 days. Is that what you want?
I knew better than to defy her. She'd kept that promise before, and I wasn't willing to risk going hungry again. I agreed and went to the fruit stand. I tried to act casual, moving slowly, trying not to draw attention. My heart pounded as I reached out, pretending to inspect a mango while slipping another into my bag. I'd barely grabbed a second one when someone grabbed me.
Hey, what do you think you're doing, girl? Stealing my mangoes?
I was so scared. A crowd had begun to gather, everyone's eyes on me. I searched for my mom, panicking, and she soon arrived. She landed a slap on my cheek first.
How could you? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? I'm so sorry, everyone. I tried my best to raise her right, but clearly she's a disappointment. I don't know where she learned this from, certainly not from me.
I felt trapped, humiliated, and completely helpless.
You poor woman. I'm sorry your daughter put you through this.
My mother sighed dramatically, wiping an imaginary tear from her cheek.
Thank you. I just wish she'd understand how much I love her and want the best for her. I don't know what else to do.
We finally left the mall, and I was fighting to hold back tears. My mother knew exactly how to manipulate the situation, making everyone see her as a victim and me as the bad one. It worked, like it always did. The second we were home, her mask dropped. Before I could even speak, she slapped me again.
You're pathetic. Can't even steal a few measly mangoes without getting caught? How stupid can you be? I swear you're more trouble than you're worth. Do you know how much you embarrassed me today? If you'd been smarter, we'd have fresh mangoes for the week. But no, you had to ruin it.
Her words hurt me, but all I could do was stand there and nod and cry, because I knew that no matter what I said, she'd never see me as anything but a failure. The years went by quite quickly. By the time I was 26, I was suffocating. I'd managed to find a part-time job at a local cafe where I saved every penny I could. I dreamed of escaping, of living a life without lies and manipulation. I thought about leaving every day, but the fear held me back. I knew they'd retaliate if I tried to break free. Finally, I gathered the courage to tell them. I was ready to move out.
You're not leaving, Jennifer. Who else will help us keep things running?
I'm 26. I have a right to live my own life.
You owe us, Jennifer. After everything we've done for you?
I was confused. Everything they'd done for me, all they'd done was steal my life, my dignity.
You're not going anywhere.
I will leave. I'm not your prisoner.
Yes, you are. And you'll stay right here where you belong.
That night, I made a decision. I was done being their puppet, done being used and controlled. They'd kept me trapped in their world of lies for far too long. But now, it was my turn to shatter their delusions. I was going to expose them. I was going to tell everyone the truth. The next morning, I bought a camera and installed it at home. Then I set up my parents to indirectly confess to their crimes. I brought up the topic of our schemes, and they started discussing everything we had done and even their next plan to con people. Everything was being recorded without them knowing. After that, I rushed to the police station. I gave them the video and poured out everything I'd kept hidden for years. I handed over all the evidence I had, emails, receipts, photos. Within days, the police launched an investigation, and they didn't waste time. The police showed up at our house with a warrant to arrest my parents. When my dad spotted them approaching, he jumped through the window and tried to escape, but he was tased. My mom attempted to run through the back door, but the house was already surrounded, so she was caught as well. My parents screamed, cursed at me as they were dragged out in handcuffs.
You ungrateful little rat! You betrayed us!
The news spread like wildfire. Reporters picked up the story, and soon, everyone in town knew what they'd done. Interview after interview aired with their victims, people whose lives had been ruined, whose kindness had been manipulated. At the trial, the courtroom was packed with people who wanted justice. Victims, family members, friends. They all came to see my parents face the consequences of their actions. As they were escorted into the courtroom, a woman stepped forward, screamed, and slapped my mother.
You destroyed my family. I pray you both rot in jail.
Others hurled insults, calling my parents monsters, thieves, liars. I saw the fear in my parents' eyes as they faced the full weight of their crimes. During the sentencing, the judge spoke with clear condemnation.
You preyed on the kindness of others, manipulating even your own daughter to fuel your greed. This court finds you both guilty of fraud, coercion, and exploitation. You are sentenced to 25 years each, without the possibility of parole.
My parents glared at me one last time as they were led away, their eyes filled with hatred. But I felt nothing. They no longer held power over me. After the trial, people approached me, some offering words of comfort, others sharing their own stories of how my parents had hurt them. I apologized, trying to make amends, but no one blamed me. They saw me as a victim, just as much as they were. With my parents gone, I was finally free to live my own life. I used my savings to open a small business, a boutique selling handmade jewelry and crafts, things I'd always loved but never had the courage to pursue. The community rallied around me, supporting my new venture, and before long, my shop blossomed. I couldn't believe the response. It was like the whole town wanted me to succeed, to rise from the ashes of my parents' deceit. An elderly woman who'd been scammed years ago by my parents was the first customer.
I'm so proud of you, dear, for not letting your parents influence you. They were unhealthy people, and I'm happy you broke free. Thankfully, by the time they're out, they'll be too old to even try anything with you. Bless you, child.
I thanked her, feeling happy about my decisions. As the weeks went on, word spread about my shop, and orders started pouring in, not just from locals, but from people in neighboring towns. I'd gone from being trapped in my parents' schemes to running a legitimate, thriving business. It was the life I'd always wanted, free from lies, manipulation, and the constant weight of shame. I later heard rumors that, while in prison, my dad stole a key to his cell with the intention of escaping, but he was caught, severely beaten, and placed in solitary confinement serves him right. As for me, each morning when I opened the shop, I felt a sense of peace. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my dignity. Thanks for watching. Please do us a favor and like the video so it can be recommended to others.
Look, I haven't done anything wrong. Everything here is in my basket, and I haven't touched anything that I don't intend to buy. He looked at me with disbelief, as if I were guilty simply by existing. Without warning, he yanked my shopping basket from my lap and began rummaging through it, pulling out items and examining them with exaggerated care. He threw each item back into the basket with unnecessary force when he didn't find anything. "You're acting like a real racist, sir. Can you stop harassing me?" But he didn't listen. Instead, he reached down, grabbing my arm roughly. Then, with a single, violent motion, he pushed me, toppling my wheelchair backward. I hit the ground hard, the coldness pressing against my back as I lay there, helpless, exposed, my wheelchair just out of reach. I fought the shame and rage boiling inside me with clenched fists. He looked down at me with a triumphant sneer. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before lying." He walked away, leaving me on the ground as shoppers stared at me. Nobody moved to help me. Life has a way of testing you when you're already down. 3 years ago, everything changed for me. I was on my way home from a long shift, just a mile from my house, when a pickup truck veered across the lane and slammed into my car head-on. The world spun, metal crunched, and all I felt was pain, sharp and unbearable. I woke up in the hospital, disoriented and numb, only to find out that my spine was fractured, leaving me paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors said I'd never walk again. Adjusting to life in a wheelchair brought its own set of challenges. Everything was different. Simple tasks, like getting groceries, became exercises in patience and humility. Before my accident, as a black man, I was no stranger to racism. Racism had been a constant, ugly shadow in my life, one I could never fully shake. Growing up black in a small town had taught me early that some people saw me as different before I'd even had a chance to speak. The thing is, those differences didn't disappear with time or maturity. If anything, they grew more pointed, especially after my accident, when I became reliant on a wheelchair. It was as though some people could only see my color and my disability, layering assumptions on top of assumptions. One of the first moments I remember was in high school. I'd been invited to a classmate's birthday party. He was a friend, or at least someone I thought of as a friend. I was excited, dressed my best, even brought a small gift. But the moment I arrived, it was different. His mom greeted everyone warmly, except me. She gave me a once-over, her gaze lingering on my dark skin, and then she sighed. She asked if I was lost, or if I needed help getting back home.
You must have the wrong house. If you don't mind, maybe you could leave to avoid getting things stained here. It's a White House, you know?
When I told her I was a friend of her son, her face went blank, and after a moment, she let me in. But even then, I could feel her eyes following me around the room, as though expecting me to act out in some way. Her wariness stole the joy from the night, but it also left me confused. I hadn't understood why I was singled out, why a friendship wasn't enough to see me as anything other than a threat. After high school, I thought things would change, but college wasn't much different. I'd been given an academic scholarship, something I was incredibly proud of. But when I'd go to the financial aid office to confirm my paperwork, I always got suspicious looks.
Are you sure you're here on an academic scholarship? I know your type. I just hope it isn't what I'm thinking.
As if I couldn't possibly have earned my place without some special assistance. And when I'd show my ID and explain, she'd nod, that hint of disbelief lingering as if waiting for me to say it was a mistake. And then, there were the times after I'd finished college. I'd gone to a restaurant once with two of my other black friends, but the servers took too long to approach our table. No. Not that they didn't see us. We were practically being ignored. When I waved one over, she looked annoyed.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize you'd want to order here. We don't get too many people like you around here.
People like me? I'm just here to eat with my friends. We're your customers, same as anyone else. When our food finally arrived after another intentional delay, it was cold and barely edible. Despite complaints, the server shrugged us off and ignored our table the rest of the night. There was a company I worked at for 2 years after college. I'd applied for a promotion I knew I was well qualified for. However, a less experienced colleague was chosen instead. I've been here longer and have more experience. I'd really like to understand why I didn't get the position. Look, it's nothing personal. Our clients just expect a certain image from us. Someone with a more polished background is usually a better fit. Of course, I knew what polished meant in that context, and it wasn't about my experience or education. I ended up getting fired just 2 weeks later. Now, as a disabled black man, the prejudice became even more pronounced. I was used to getting wary looks, being treated like a suspect for just existing, but somehow, being in a wheelchair made people feel more comfortable expressing their ignorance, their judgments, and even their open hostility. I thought I'd seen it all, until the day I encountered him. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was rolling through the aisles of my local supermarket, minding my own business, picking up a few essentials. As I reached for a can of soup on the lower shelf, I noticed a man standing a few feet away, watching me with a hard, scrutinizing glare. He was tall, muscular, and wore a uniform. The badge on his chest showed that he was a cop. "What do you think you're doing?" I was caught off guard by the aggression in his voice. Shoppers nearby turned to look, their eyes going between me and the officer. "Just shopping, officer. Don't lie to me. I've seen your type before, pretending to be innocent when you're nothing but wolves in sheep's clothing." He stepped closer, crossing his arms over his chest. "Look, I haven't done anything wrong. Everything here is in my basket, and I haven't touched anything that I don't intend to buy." He looked at me with disbelief, as if I were guilty simply by existing. Without warning, he yanked my shopping basket from my lap and began rummaging through it, pulling out items and examining them with exaggerated care. He threw each item back into the basket with unnecessary force when he didn't find anything. "You're acting like a real racist, sir. Can you stop harassing me?" But he didn't listen. Instead, he reached down, grabbing my arm roughly. Then, with a single, violent motion, he pushed me, toppling my wheelchair backward. I hit the ground hard, the coldness pressing against my back as I lay there, helpless, exposed, my wheelchair just out of reach. I fought the shame and rage boiling inside me with clenched fists. He looked down at me with a triumphant sneer. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before lying." He walked away, leaving me on the ground as shoppers stared at me. Nobody moved to help me. Slowly, painfully, I managed to pull myself up and back into my chair. I lied? About what? He didn't even find anything incriminating on me, yet he treated me that way. I knew I couldn't let this go. As soon as I could, I went to the precinct where the officer worked, determined to file a report. But I was met with indifferent officers. They didn't believe me, didn't care to. They told me I had no proof. No witnesses who'd back up my story. My words, it seemed, held little weight against an officer's badge. But I wasn't giving up. I remembered the lady at the counter in the supermarket. She'd been right there when it happened, so she'd seen everything. I returned to the mall the next day, hoping she'd help me access the CCTV footage. When I reached the customer service desk, I saw her there, the same woman who'd been present during the confrontation. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to speak with you about what happened yesterday with that officer." She eyed me in a very unfriendly way. She didn't even try to hide the disdain on her face. "Could I please get access to the security footage? It'll show what really happened."
We don't just hand out footage to anyone. And besides, I don't think it'll show what you're hoping it will.
The way she said it, so dismissive, so final, left no room for discussion. It was clear she didn't want to help, and that her refusal was fueled by something more than just store policy. I was about to leave, feeling utterly defeated, when someone stopped me. "Excuse me, sir. I overheard you asking for the CCTV footage. Could you tell me what happened?" I turned around to see a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with a kind, concerned expression on his face. He introduced himself as the owner of the mall. I was relieved and told him everything. He looked so angry. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. I don't tolerate that kind of behavior in my establishment. Let's get that footage." Together, we went to the security office, and within minutes, he'd pulled up the video of the incident. The cop's hostile approach, his rough handling, and the moment he pushed me out of my wheelchair. It was all there, undeniable and damning. "We're going to make sure you get justice. Behaviors like this should not be tolerated." He offered to accompany me to the police station, and with the footage in hand and his support, I had hope. We arrived at the precinct together, and this time, they couldn't brush me off. The evidence was clear, undeniable. The police chief watched the footage, and his face grew pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. The officer who had assaulted me was summoned to the office. His face was filled with shock and anger when he saw me there, alongside the mall owner. He tried to stammer out excuses, but there was no hiding from the truth. The police chief stripped him of his badge on the spot. The man who had once looked down on me with such arrogance now looked small, defeated. As he was escorted out in handcuffs, I felt a sense of justice I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just a dismissal. There was a public statement so that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. The woman at the customer service desk wasn't spared either. The mall owner reviewed the footage from our conversation, which clearly showed her refusal to help me and her condescending attitude. She was charged with obstruction of justice and taken into custody as well. Word of the incident spread, and soon the headlines were everywhere. Police officer dismissed and jailed for assaulting disabled black man. News outlets covered the story, highlighting how an officer had abused his power, using it to bully instead of protect. The mall owner's involvement didn't go unnoticed either. People praised him for his courage and integrity, for standing up against racism and discrimination. His business got even more popular. I often visited, and each time, he welcomed me warmly. He became more than just an acquaintance. He became a true friend, someone who'd proven that compassion and justice still had a place in the world. Of course, the racism didn't stop there, but it was reduced. My picture had gone viral, so most white racists avoided me as best as they could. But some others didn't. I didn't hesitate to report them. And sometimes, anyone around who knew me would stand up for me and tell the racist off. I came across some good strangers who also stood up for me. A charity organization for disabled people heard about the story and helped me set up a business. They also got me a bigger apartment and changed my wheelchair to a better one that made movement even easier for me. As for the racist officer, news of his mistreatment of a disabled black man reached the prison where he was held. Unfortunately for him, his cellmates were blacks and frequently beat him up to teach him a harsh lesson. Meanwhile, his wife was attacked on social media by many people, and her address was doxed, leaving her scared. She eventually left the state, and, being far away, she can no longer even visit her husband. While the racist officer and supermarket lady rot in jail, I was having a good life. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
They came over to my workplace to threaten me. but I refuse to be scared of them. Your precious little daughter is going to jail whether you like it or not. Yell all you want. I'm going to testify against her. And on the day of the hearing, I fearlessly walked into the witness box and said my truth. I also showed the recording I took. It was clear. My sister killed the girl. There was no need for further argument. The judge decided to pass his verdict. 36 years in prison with no options for bail. If she ever tried to escape, she would be killed. I watched my parents wail at the corner where they sat, but I didn't budge. The girl's parents thanked me so much for helping them get justice. Speaking to them, I left the courtroom. My mom fainted at the entrance of the place on their way out and had a heart attack. She was quickly taken to the hospital. Of course not. A year later, they came over to my place to ask for forgiveness. Have you ever experienced being the less favored child? Being the one to watch your parents steal the world for their golden child? Well, I have. My name's Brittany, and I'm the youngest of my parents' children. My parents had my sister at the time when life was still rosy for them. They were both fresh graduates and had gotten good jobs without even struggling. They got married a year later and had my sister 2 years later. On the day my sister was born, my dad got a promotion at work, so it was a double celebration for him. As for my mom, the company she worked at granted her leave for a whole year and still paid her monthly for it. They thought my sister was their good luck charm, so they adored her. They spoiled her silly. My sister attended the best school and got whatever she asked for. She wasn't allowed to lack anything. Well, 5 years later, they had me. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't aware that I was coming that day, so he left my mom and went to work. That same day, he had a physical fight with one of the workers at the company where he worked. As a result of that, he got suspended indefinitely. It was on his way home that he got informed about my arrival. He didn't feel as excited because he was already having a bad day. Anyway, I was finally brought home with my parents after 3 days at the hospital. On the day we arrived home, my mom got a call from her workplace. Unlike the first time, she was only given 3 months leave this time and wouldn't receive any pay in those 3 months. All of the sudden happenings caused my parents to be devastated. And not just that, it made them start to hate me because they thought I brought bad luck to them. After 3 months, I was left in the care of my dad, who still hadn't been called back to work. My dad didn't care about me, and he didn't hide it. He would often feed my sister and hug her, ignoring my cries for food and warmth. As time went on, my sister also inherited the hatred. It was obvious that my parents didn't like me, and seeing that, my sister also showed her dislike for me. When we got to high school, my sister would bully me nonstop and laugh with her friends whenever I cried. One time, my sister came into the cafeteria during break, where almost everyone was. I was wondering why she was suddenly walking towards me, because the only time she approached me was to make fun of me.
Did you tell them you wet the bed last night?
Wet the bed? I'd stopped before I was even 2. My dad had forced me to learn how to use a potty at 9 months old. He did that because he was tired of having to change my diaper every time. In fact, my sister was the one who continuously wet her bed until she was 6. I was confused as to why she was finally asking me if I told my friends about something that never happened. What do you mean? I didn't wet my bed? I don't do that? I couldn't let her lie like that. It was annoying. I didn't care if she was going to hit me. All I knew was I wanted to stand up for myself.
Everyone! Brittany wets her bed. Be careful how you associate with her so you don't catch the bedwetting virus.
All the courage I'd mustered was gone. Hearing everyone laugh in the cafeteria broke my heart. I looked up and saw my friends laughing too. That broke my heart even more. In shame, I stood up and ran out of the cafeteria. I went to the bathroom and cried so hard. I felt so embarrassed. When we got home and I reported what happened to my parents, they acted as though they were deaf. Their eyes remained on the TV show they were watching. It felt as if I didn't even exist. That pushed me to more tears. Just as I was about to leave the living room, my sister came in. My parents, who completely ignored me about 2 minutes ago, were suddenly speaking to my sister and telling her what the show was about. I slapped myself mentally for thinking they would have my back. I retired to my room where I cried until I fell asleep. Life continued like that. with my sister being the world's favorite every time. When I finished high school, my sister was already in her 3rd year in college. I needed to pay a fee to apply for a scholarship exam, but my parents refused to give it to me.
We have no money to give to you. Go get a job. You're not too young to work.
You're 20 and asking us for money? That's so low of you. Get a job or forget about college.
Of course, I expected that. I mean, why would they waste their money on me when their golden daughter needed it more? It made me feel sad, though. I wasn't asking them to see me through college. All I wanted was a very little amount to use in applying for a scholarship. After their refusal, I checked the ending date for registration and saw that it was still 2 months away. I was so happy. I went out in search of a job, and luckily, I got one at a high school as a janitor. No, I never dreamed about being a janitor. The older workers there felt sad for me. They'd never seen a janitor who was young like me. Well, I worked hard. The workers were kind enough to help me sometimes. After 1 month, I got my salary. It was 10 times the money I needed, and that made me have second thoughts. I imagined how much money I would make in 6 months if I didn't resign. It was a lot. So, I decided to continue working there. I paid the scholarship fee, got registered, and then waited for the day of the scholarship. I didn't let my parents know that I'd been able to pay the fee. I asked him again 2 days after I paid with my money, but they lashed out at me.
Don't they pay you for the silly work you do? Use that for your stupid scholarship and quit bothering us.
Again, I felt bad. I knew they had the money. They were both just being unfair to me. Well, eventually, the day of the scholarship exam came. I was granted a day to be absent at work. I made my way to the school where it was to be held. It didn't take long to arrive there. I walked straight to the room. The exam didn't take long. We were asked to wait for another 2 hours to get our results. I waited. 2 hours came and the results were out. Luckily for me, I passed. I was granted the scholarship. My joy knew no bounds. When I got home and broke the news to my family, they all acted indifferently. I didn't get even the tiniest congratulations from them. Well, it did bother me a little, but I soon pushed it off to think of how to merge work with it. By the time school started, 3 months later, I already figured out a way. I'd stopped working as a janitor. I now work at a restaurant. I go there only in the evenings, and I only work for 6 hours. The salary is a little higher than the first job, so I was very comfortable with it. In my 3rd year in college, I moved out of my parents' house. My sister was already done, but she refused to work. My parents made me give my sister part of my salary monthly, and that made me angry. She also got into trouble many times with our neighbors. Rather than discipline her for her silliness, my parents would lash out at our neighbors, claiming they provoked my sister. I moved out because I was fed up with all of that. Life alone was peaceful and the best for my mental health. My parents didn't try to stop me. They didn't need me after all. At a point after I moved out, I stopped talking to them. They didn't bother me either. Life was going that way until I saw my sister beating a girl up one day on my way back from work. I quickly hid behind a car. The girl was already bleeding and looked like she'd passed out already, but my sister didn't stop. I pulled out my phone and recorded the scene. When my sister suddenly left, I went to the girl and saw that she wasn't breathing anymore. Out of fear, I ran away. For days, that scene was in my head. I couldn't believe my sister was a murderer. I wondered what the girl's family were going through. It was about a week later before I heard that the girl's parents were suing my sister. Apparently, the girl had told them she was going to settle things with my sister after they fought over a man. So, my sister was a huge suspect. I also heard that it would help them better if they had a witness and evidence. I decided to step in. The girl deserved justice. I didn't care about my sister going to jail. She and my parents never cared for me. I always felt alone with them, so I considered them strangers. I visited the girl's parents and promised to be their witness. I also told them I had evidence. They thanked me so much, her mom in tears. They couldn't be more grateful. My family got to hear about it somehow, and they were livid. They came over to my workplace to threaten me, but I refused to be scared of them. Your precious little daughter is going to jail whether you like it or not. Yell all you want. I'm going to testify against her. On the day of the hearing, I fearlessly walked into the witness box and said my truth. I also showed the recording I took. It was clear. My sister killed the girl. There was no need for further argument. The judge decided to pass his verdict. 36 years in prison with no options for bail. If she ever tried to escape, she would be killed. I watched my parents wail at the corner where they sat, but I didn't budge. The girl's parents thanked me so much for helping them get justice. After I was done speaking to them, I left the courtroom. My mom fainted at the entrance of the place on their way out and had a heart attack. She was quickly taken to the hospital. It was a very hard time for them. But did I care? Of course not. A year later, they came over to my place to ask for forgiveness, but I kicked them out. I knew they only came because they were lonely, but I refused to fill that space for them. They deserve to live in pain. I hear they live with 4 cats, and my dad has been diagnosed with cancer, so my mom takes care of him alone. It's been 5 whole years, and I'm now married to the love of my life. I still don't talk to my parents. In fact, I live in a different country now, where they'd never find me. My sister still has 30 years to spend in jail. By the time she's out, I'm sure my parents won't be alive anymore. As for my sister, she'd be nearly 70 by then. She'd surely be miserable. What can she achieve as an ex-convict at age 70? Absolutely nothing. I feel no ounce of pity for her. She deserves it. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.